audio. Audio is coming through. You can leave that going. Start recording. Alright, where is my laptop? There's my laptop. Just gonna get over here. She's like, oh crap, I don't have any glue. Welcome everybody to this episode of the Tabletop Battlefield Live. I'm Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield, and tonight we're continuing our series. I think we're on to part 8, maybe 7, I really haven't been counting, of painting up Cypher, Lord of the Fallen from Games Workshop's Triumphant of the Primarch, released, back in March-ish, I believe it was. And we're getting pretty close to finishing the miniature up. I'm thinking tonight we can start doing some sub-assemblies, because we still got some little details here to do on the body as well as the guns. But last time, let me slide over to my other camera. Last time, we got quite far on painting up the backpack here. We got the scabbard done as well as a lot of the details on the backpack itself. Gave it a nice wash. Tonight's main focus is going to be the hilt and the handle and the pommel of the sword. And then once we get that done, that will give this piece done, as well as I've got the other side of the cloak done pretty well. And we're going to be able to glue those pieces onto the miniature tonight. And I think for my long rambling topic tonight, I'm going to go and talk about how not to play Warhammer 40,000 Apocalypse. So, like I mentioned before, I don't really play 40K anymore, I just paint the miniatures. But way back in the day, I played a number of games of Warhammer 40,000 Apocalypse when it first came out. I don't know, it's been about 9 years or so. God goodness, I don't know when exactly it was. It was way back in the Tabletop Battlefield days. You should go back, I'm pretty sure we talked about it at some point. Season 2, I think, is when it came out. But I guess I saw some little notes here and there that Games Workshop is planning to re-release a new Warhammer 40,000 Apocalypse because everything that's old is new again, because that's kind of what they've been doing with 8th edition. So I figured, why not talk about how not to play it, because you don't want it to be a miserable experience. Every time I played Warhammer 40,000 Apocalypse, it was an absolutely miserable experience. Now, it's certainly possible to play it and have an enjoyable time from what I've been told. It's just every time I tried to play with a group of people, it was an absolute disaster. So I want to share some tips with you on how to avoid your games of Warhammer 40,000 Apocalypse becoming unmitigated disasters. And also, just one last quick note before we dive into painting here. If you're watching this later on YouTube, or you listen to this on the Tabletop Battlefield podcast feed, you can watch these things live and chat with me in the chat room over at twitch.tv/Rocco Robotics. Okay, let's get started with painting. First thing, before I actually dive into the handle part of the sword, I do need to go back and give the back of his backpack here a black gloss wash. So I'm going to use the non-oil shade. I mentioned how much I love this stuff plenty of times in the past because it kind of makes it look like it's grungy and dirty, but also keeps that metallic shine. And the reason I'm going to give the back this wash as well, I noticed that when you put this thing on the miniature, this area up here, or maybe this area, one of these two areas here are actually visible over Cypher's shoulder. So you do got to properly paint this part of the backpack. The back side of the sword scabbard down here that I just left black, you actually can't see that when this is glued on to his back. So I'm just going to go ahead and let it go. With the non-oil gloss wash, I kind of put a little bit of it all over the miniature, a little bit, depends on what the effect I'm trying to go for, but a lot of it I try to work into areas around the details, so the little crevices there, or this little pit right here. In the shadows of where these two pipes are, I tend to put some around the base of any kind of 3D object. It kind of does a little bit of the ambient occlusion effect, for those of you who use Blender. And that kind of brings out the detail a little bit more. Same thing like in here, the recessed areas. It's it's a typical wash type effect. And then maybe just put a little bit on some of the other areas. But with any of these shades from GW, they can do really awesome stuff, and they can also screw things up really bad. Especially if you're really trying to go for a miniature that's going to look awesome photographed up close. Be very careful with heavy use of the washes. I've done this plenty of times with my own miniature line with the Kaladajnia miniatures. I put too much wash on, and when you do take a picture of the nice 60mm macro lens, you can see all the little imperfections of the wash, and it doesn't look very good when it's a nice close-up photo. It may look cool to the eye, it may look great in the battlefield, but not so much when we're taking close-up detailed photos. Okay, so I just need to get that quick step out of the way. Now we're going to move on to actually painting the hilt and everything of the sword. I think my goal here is to end up giving it a lot of, what do I want to say? What's the word? Brain fail. Gold. Gold's what I want to do. So, it's going to be mostly probably a gold pommel, a pretty heavy gold hilt. I'm probably going to paint the straps here, maybe a little bit lighter color brown, so maybe sort of like a leather-like color. But either way, when I apply a gold color, I always start with a brown base. In this case, I've got some Rhinox hide, and this is so I can give that whole tarnished gold look. Actually, it's going to be very similar to what you see over here on these little piping exhaust ports at the moment, because it's gold, but it's very tarnished and worn gold. It definitely gives the idea that it's old, the gold's lost its luster, maybe it's a little bit dirty, things like that. Now, Rhinox hide is a base color, which means the Games Workshop base colors, you want to go ahead and water them down a fair amount. And I am working on a wet palette. Just makes it easier to keep the paint from drying out, and it lets you keep the paint for several days at a time in case you will need to come back to this part later on. So, just checking some audio level things as I do. Okay. Let's talk about Warhammer 40,000 Apocalypse. So I have no idea really what's going to be in the new game. I read a whopping one news article about it. But the basic gist is it's kind of like what it was, 9 years ago when it came out. It's how do you play freaking huge games of Warhammer 40,000, because that kind of stuff is in the lore, and it would be kind of cool to be able to play that. The problem is it's a very easy way to play Warhammer 40,000 and screw everything up and have an absolutely miserable experience. So let's talk about some of the lessons I've learned when it comes to playing Warhammer 40,000 Apocalypse. First and foremost, it's going to be a very, very long game, and that's perfectly fine. That's what it's designed to be. It's not designed to be something you play in an evening. You're probably looking a minimum 1 day, maybe even a whole weekend kind of a thing, depending on just how big you are getting with your gameplay. Because if you try to cram the game in in an evening, and that's basically every time I've tried to play Warhammer 40,000 Apocalypse. The people are like, well, let's try to cram it in an evening. We have about a 4-hour time block if you're lucky. You just have lots and lots of problems, and here's why you're going to run into a lot of problems. You're trying to take something that's much longer and condense it down, so oftentimes what people will do is they'll set time limits. Tournaments have time limits, so why not try to set time limits? And it breaks down to where, you've got your movement phase, your shooting phase, your assault phase, or, whatever they call it these days. But, you have your different phases, and each phase has a certain amount of time for the people for a team to perform their actions, whether that's one person or 7 people. So it could be like, 20 minutes for the shooting phase, 20 minutes for the assault phase, all that kind of stuff. And if you don't get your actions in that time, well, it sucks to be you. You're kind of screwed, right? That's the mentality. And this creates so many problems. People just end up shouting at each other. And let's just talk about a whole number of ways and why this starts to happen like that. First of all, you can't get people's attention. When there's 5 people playing the game and they're all shooting, one side's all shooting at somebody else, inevitably 2 people want to shoot at somebody at the same time, and because you're on this time crunch, you're both yelling at the same guy, pay attention to me, pay attention to my attacks, let's get my attacks resolved, blah blah blah, right? And so what inevitably happens is 2 things are going to happen here. Either one, the person's just going to ignore one person and resolve one of the attacks, and hopefully he'll have time to resolve the other person's attack. If not, then you're going to have people start crying foul that, oh, he was stalling because I declared the attack before the time ran out, but because he wasn't, one person can't talk to 3 people at once, he wasn't able to actually get around to resolve my attack. And then that creates all sorts of problems. 2, the person may try to handle the defense of their unit by handing off to somebody else, or maybe another player on that side who kind of knows the army will jump in and take control of the unit and resolves the attacks. So another player on the defending team is the one who's rolling the armor saves, figuring out, removing casualties, assigning wounds, all that kind of stuff. That has its own set of problems. Like, for example, back in the day, this is 4th edition Warhammer 40,000, I believe, the Tau Empire stealth suits, they work quite a bit different than they do now, where I think now they're just like, hey, we get a bonus to our cover save, because that's cool. Now, the old stealth rules was a lot cooler, because they had something back in the day called a night vision check. It was essentially, the idea was if you're fighting at night, you'd have to make a check to see if you could see the unit. And the idea was you rolled 2d6 times 3, and that was how far the unit could see towards its target. So you roll your 2d6, it's a 7, times it by 3, 21. That means the attacking unit could see 21 inches to its target. And if the target was beyond 21 inches, you could not actually legitimately attack that target, because the idea was, well, you can only see so far at night. That's, too bad. You didn't roll far enough. Well, the stealth suits, because of the fact, they're kind of a cloaked unit, they forced that roll on every attack. So effectively, there was a maximum range of 36 inches, theoretically, firing at the stealth suits. Practically, you're more likely 18 to 21 inches was your effective range against them, because, D6, 6 to 7. But, you could, if you rolled boxcars, you could shoot at them from 36 inches away. Well, people would blow up my stealth suits in an Apocalypse game from, who knows how far away, because, the defenders didn't know the rules about that particular special ability. And, of course, I would say, well, that your attack missed, it doesn't count, and then the guys would, well, the models are already off the table, and it would just get, just more things to yell about, right? Because now you've got people controlling units who don't know what they're doing. And then there's the glorious response to where the attacker, he's trying to get the guy's target's attention, please resolve my attacks, blah blah blah. So what does he do instead of the defender not acknowledging him? He just goes ahead and rolls his dice anyway. So he rolls his dice and gets oh, I got 20 hits. And just before I finish that story, what I'm doing at this point is I'm going to start working on the straps of the handle itself. And I'm taking small amounts at a time of Keslev flesh here, mixing it in to the Rhinox hide on my palette, so I get a little bit lighter color. And I'm just very carefully applying it to these straps here, using my artificial layer extra small brush. Alright, so someone would go ahead and start making their attacks, roll their dice, and then the problem was the person who initially made the attack, the defender was working with the resolve, would say kill the unit. This happened several times. And then the guy who rolled his dice would start complaining, oh, well, the unit's dead, I get to attack somebody else. And it's like, and then you get in these fights, no, you don't, you idiot, you rolled your dice, it's your own darn fault that you didn't talk to your buddy that he was firing, you know, a template weapon at an Imperial Guard squad. Maybe you should have talked about that around. Oh, you know, template weapons, that's something we don't have anymore. For you newbies, a template weapon was something very, very different in the old days. Actually, I imagine there probably aren't a lot of people at this point who are brand new to Warhammer 40,000 8th edition. I'd imagine just about everybody listening to this probably knows what a template weapon is. But, you know. So you just get these conflicts that would occur because you simply did not have the time to properly resolve all the actions in a Warhammer 40,000 game. So that's the biggest reason, is as you're like, well, just don't. Seriously, just don't try to cram it in to a one night. It's just not going to work. It's a terrible idea. Okay, so I think that covers that whole thing. Oh, and the other problem with it, right? When you start trying to cram it in a short time period, what happens when you run into rules questions? Because inevitably it's Warhammer 40,000. If you ever played the game without looking at the rule book, maybe 8th edition you can. Maybe. Because you have the sheets there with a lot of special rules on them. But back in the day, when you had codexes that did not have the special rules and units in front of you, you were looking up stuff left and right. I never, ever, I guess I played Warhammer 40,000 consistently for 8 years. So in 8 years of playing Warhammer 40,000 consistently, I never played a game where I did not have to look up a rule about my own army, or for sure the opponent, or between myself and the opponent, one of us was always looking up something. The rules just were kind of a mess like that. So when you're under a time situation, that just gives people even more incentive to just kind of hurry up and try to maybe make up rules, or not really read the rules the right way. There's times, well, that's more of a group problem. I'll talk about that one later. That was a hilarious Warhammer. That was a hilarious Apocalypse game. So, the long story short is that if you're trying to cram, a 40k Apocalypse game into a short time period, you give plenty of reasons for people to get upset and angry with each other and get at each other's throats, ready to just throw up their hands and just quit because, it's like, screw this, I'm done, and the tempers are already flaring, and it's just an absolute nightmare. I need to go grab a wash quickly. One moment. Had to step off camera there and just grab the next thing I need, the Seraphim Sophia. But I'm going to actually use that in a moment. I want to let those layers of paint dry just a tiny bit. I think what I'm going to do right now is start applying a small amount of gold to the various parts that I want to be gold. So in this case, I'm using some Greedy Gold from the War Paints series by Army Painter. I just bought this from a local hobby shop, and that's why it's like one of my paints is not GW. I was in a different store at the time, and back then they did not sell Games Workshop paints, so I bought this instead, and it works, well, great, actually. I actually really like the eyedropper bottles better than what Games Workshop does with their paint pods, but that's just my personal preference. Because paint pods, like here's Stormhost Silver, look at that. If someone knows how to actually have a paint pod that does not get all gunked up, that'd be awesome. I should actually ask the guy who runs the GW store here. He'd probably know. There's got to be something I'm not doing right. I'm not cleaning something right, or I don't know what. But anyway, with the Army Painters War Paint series, they tend to be a little bit thick paint-wise, so I do water them down a tiny bit. But I'm only using incredibly small amounts of paint on my brush. Yeah, you probably can't even. You might be able to see a little bit of a gold reflection on the tip there as I rotate it, but not a lot. Um, and I'm just putting just very small amounts of gold. You want to leave some of the brown showing through. All right. So disaster pit number 2 you need to avoid when playing Warhammer 40,000 Apocalypse. Know who you're playing the game with. Yeah. Gamers are competitive. They are very, very, very competitive. Especially in the United States. I can't talk about the rest of the world. I've heard in some places people are kind of civilized. Here in the United States, we're brutally, violently competitive with each other for every single possible thing. It's just how we are for some weird reason. I don't know why, but we are. Especially when it comes to tabletop games. And we have no problem building disgusting armies to violently crush your opponents and make them cry. In fact, there's a very popular game that's still out today who no longer has their page 5 rule set that was basically about saying that this game is about making your opponents cry. I don't think 3rd edition War Machine has page 5 in it anymore. Actually, I don't know. I don't remember. I haven't read the book in a while. But if you don't know who you're playing with, you really don't know what type of character you're going to run into. And highly competitive people make Warhammer 40,000 Apocalypse no fun whatsoever. And I'm not going to lie, I'm quite highly competitive. I've talked about this on this show before about my obsession of collecting running medals and winning races around here. Well, anyway, regardless, I can be very, very competitive. So at the very least, if you're playing, Apocalypse, you have to be willing to turn off your hyper-competitive side. Because you're not going to make things better by being competitive with other people. You're probably going to get thoroughly annihilated because Warhammer 40,000 Apocalypse is simply about killing stuff over and over again. And you just got to realize that if you're going to be competitive playing it, you're really going to make everybody else miserable. And if everybody else is miserable, you're probably going to be miserable in the process. So let's talk about some of the ways that you can basically be a jerk in Warhammer 40,000 Apocalypse. The biggest way is to complain and question every single freaking rule. Because, once again, if you're playing it wrong, which unfortunately every time I did was, you're under a time constraint because you have to 20 minutes to resolve your actions. Otherwise, the game takes forever. All that kind of stuff. So if you're out there questioning every rule, challenging every assumption, doing this, blah, 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 you're slowing the game down and you're making people get angry because as soon as kind of pulling those tactics out cause somebody not be able to perform an action later on in the game, because they ran out of time, they're going to be absolutely irritated with you. And yes, there are people that have done this, and when I play these games at the GW stores, that's where I played a lot of my Apocalypse stuff, was at the GW stores. And they just insist on checking on every little rule, every little detail, challenging everybody and everything, forcing everybody to look stuff up, and then you got to go bug the game master, which is usually the store owner, which is of course in a one-man GW store is like they're trying to sell stuff because it's a store, holy crap, and they don't really want to necessarily deal with answering rules questions every 5 minutes because they got some kid wanting to buy the new Dark Imperium starter set. And that's their main focus, is to sell people Warhammer stuff. And the other side effects of having people who are really competitive, they tend to bring in armies that are just brutally disgusting. And they're not any fun to play against. I remember the very first Warhammer 40,000 Apocalypse game we played. This is like the weekend it came out. It may have been a week. It was very close to when the game came out. Because I remember there's a massive $600 Tau Empire Hunter Cadre, whatever the formation is, that they call the Tau uses. It was just like a $600 set that was normally $1,000. That was back when GW gave really nice discounts. But I assembled that thing up in like a weekend, got assembled and painted. And I was one of the first people to show up for this Apocalypse game, get things set up. And I had managed to, in a 3,000 point list, get 6 broadsides, which at the time was 6 railguns. And that was considered, initially they were like, whoa, that's disgusting. You got 6 broadsides for 6 railguns in your army. And I also had like a hammerhead or 2. So I probably had like 8 railguns in the army. And that was like that was disgusting. And then some guy showed up with 5 titans, very quickly making 6 broadsides seem like nothing. And then somebody else showed up with something like 50 Imperial Guard tanks. So there really wasn't a points limit for any of the armies. It was more of a, what do I want to say? What's the proper? It was a minimum points value. So 3,000 points is kind of like the minimum they wanted you to bring. And if you could bring more than that, go to town, have fun, whatever it may be. So I only could field 3,000 points. I had a relatively small army, but then these guys showed up with tons of vehicles, tons of titans, all that kind of stuff. And it turned into a very lopsided battle because there wasn't any real thought process about how do you want to actually build your armies. Because, I'll talk about that in one moment here. What I just did here is I took some Stormhost Silver. This is a very bright silver, metallic silver color from Games Workshop Citadel line of paints. I mixed in a little bit into the greedy gold I had, and you can see there it kind of gave it a little bit of a brighter gold, so it still makes it a less, less saturated gold, so it looks a little bit brighter. But because it's the metallic color, it still retains the metallic sheen. It's a great way to have gold highlights. And I'm now going to put very small amounts of this, kind of a few highlights on these gold regions. Not many, just a few. And you're working with very light brush strokes. So once again, this is all about trying to give the illusion that this sword is just kind of tarnished and worn out. Alright, so what was I talking about there? I got sidetracked myself. Oh yeah, so because back in the day with Apocalypse, you could bring whatever you wanted to the tabletop. It was the first time that Games Workshop really got rid of the Force Organization chart. So in some ways, it's kind of the preview of what 6th and 7th edition would become, which I'll mention right now. That was the main reason as to why I kind of got tired of playing 40K. It was they got rid of the Force Organization chart, so you essentially could get who knows what in your standard games of 40K. But before that, with Apocalypse, you get who knows what going on with your Apocalypse games. So you would end up with these ridiculously unbalanced forces, and the game, granted, like I said, Apocalypse is all about just kill stuff and kill stuff fast. When it's one side just wiping out the other, and usually I was always on the side getting wiped out for whatever particular reason, it just became a massacre, and that's not fun. I mean, maybe some people enjoy just taking their models off the tabletop, but that's not particularly how I enjoy playing these games, so when the games come down to just, one side's getting constantly tabled and wiped off the board, and the other side you can't even do enough damage to reduce their firepower at all, it's pretty miserable. Because, you have like a situation, like I mentioned, where a guy brought 50 freaking Imperial Guard tanks to the tabletop. Why somebody has 50 Imperial Guard tanks, let alone all painted the same, I have no freaking clue why you would have that many tanks, but he did. I don't know why you would do that, but you apparently would. And so, back in the day, before 8th edition, infantry guys, for the most part, couldn't hurt tanks unless you had some anti-tank weapons. So when you faced an army that was all tanks and all titans, and that kind of thing happened quite a bit in Apocalypse, you would be stuck in a situation where half your army, because, your army was a lot of infantry and more of a standard what do we call now battle for? Actually, I don't know what they call it today. But more of a standard army. A lot of you guys just couldn't do any damage. They just got massacred again and again and again. So you really need to sit down and talk with your opponents to figure out what exactly kind of game you want to play. And I know this has been something that Games Workshop's been pitching for a while now. That's kind of been that was kind of their mentality with 6th and 7th edition. No one really did that because that took a lot of extra time. But when it comes to Warhammer 40,000 Apocalypse, well, you can go ahead and do that now because it's Apocalypse, and Apocalypse is allowed to take a long time. Okay. So what you want to do, as I'm sticking my artificial layer extra small brush out here, I just took some of the Seraphim Sepia shade. This is the kind of brown shade from Games Workshop's Citadel line of paints. And I'm going to put some of this around the gold regions, in particular in some of the recesses around the gold regions. But you do want to run a little bit over some of the gold, just to kind of dull it down a tiny bit. I'm putting just tiny little drops here and there. Because once again, it's this tarnished gold look, so you don't want too much of it. You don't want to really wear down the gold a lot, just a little bit. And then you want to go in between each of the little straps here on the handle itself. Because the other thing you really want to do when it comes to planning your armies is kind of working with your opponents to figure out and understand each other's armies. Surprises in Apocalypse games aren't really fun because they almost always result in people yelling about the freaking rules. Because you may want, if you want to try something kind of clever or something kind of funny, you can do that. But it's not a bad idea to at least talk with a game master, or maybe if you don't really have a game master per se, maybe the other side, their team leader, just let them get an idea of what's going on, so you can just not be surprised, not by what their tactics are, but also in case your ideas about the rules are wrong. I mean, I had this real jerk face move I would do because the rules are very poorly written. In the original Apocalypse book, there was this formation that you could pay, I think, like extra 50 points or something like that. It was really low. And what it was a stealth team, so Tau Empire stealth team, along with up to 3 crisis suit teams. And what you would do is you would deep strike the stealth suit team, and as long as that guy landed on target, you could then deep strike the crisis suit teams, I think within 12 inches of him, and they would automatically land without scattering. And the only rule was that the stealth suits had to be on the battlefield to, use the call down the crisis suits. So I would always deep strike in the stealth suits first, oftentimes in the first turn, because you could do that in Apocalypse. And then as long as they landed on target, I would then put my crisis suits around them, and you had then 9 twin-linked fusion blasters that would cook a super heavy alive in one turn. It's a complete jerk move, I'm not going to lie. It ticked people off like crazy. Because you would think that it's one of those situations where, well, it wouldn't seem like that you'd be able to do that. Like the stealth suits come down first and immediately the other guys, can drop in, but the way the rule is worded, you could do that. And that was just one of those kind of things that, this is competitive me talking again, but I would do that kind of stuff to overcome the fact that I had a crappier army. And, your natural tendency here is now, okay, let's be even more of a jerk because I've got a crappier army. Now, there's been situations where people try to pull stuff like that, and if you know how the rule works, you then point out, hey, you can't actually do that. And then when you show them why you can't do that, they get angry and upset about that, and their kind of master plan falls apart. In a different Apocalypse game I played, the opponent, they were trying to be fun and clever, because they were holding a fortress, and we were sieging the fortress for some reason. I forgot what the whole storyline was. I think in this case I was fighting alongside the forces of the Imperium. Was this the Storm Raven one? Okay, the Thunderhawk one. I'll tell that story in a minute. There's a hilarious story from this mission. Oh, that was a different one. But anyway, regardless. So, it was a Orc Chaos Alliance in the fortress. And the Orc player went ahead and deployed his, the giant green tide. That was a giant formation of all the Orc boys. And, it's kind of what he did was kind of a funny, clever thing, but the idea is he spread these guys out in such a way that it would be impossible to deep strike into the fortress, because we had one of the guys had his Space Marine army that was pure close combat. He wanted to deep strike in that fortress and start kicking face because he could do it, no trouble. Hammers of Dorn. So the way these Orc boys are set up was such that there would be impossible to deep strike into it without causing mishap. Now, in all reality, you had to be within 2 inches of a neighboring model to be in coherency. These Orc boys were not in coherency, not by a long shot. And this, just from the start, just caused absolute rage on both sides. Because, it was, we're trying to be clever. No, you're not. It's illegal. And oh my goodness, rage, rage, rage. From that point on, that game was just done. I'm thinking, yeah, that was a story. Okay, I'm gonna move on to adding some highlights here on the straps, and what I'm just doing is taking almost pure Keslev flesh, maybe having a tiny bit of the Rhinox hide mix into it, and just very carefully highlighting edges of the straps. This is something that's very easy to screw up. There we go. I think I'm doing. There we go. That looks good. I'm gonna keep doing that around the entire sword here. Just make sure whether you do the top or bottom of the strap highlight, just keep it the same. I'm doing the top of this. Well, I guess it'd be the bottom of the strap, which is technically its top, the way it's sitting on the guy's back. But regardless. But I can tell you we can tell you a funny story of all these miserable stories about 40K Apocalypse. So there's a hilarious story once. We're not sure. I don't remember exactly what happened, but we all brought, in this case, it was 2,000 point army. So I had my 2,000 points of Tau, and there was a Space Wolf player he didn't quite have 2,000 points. So what he did is he brought about 1,000 points of special characters and like souped up Terminators, and then he took 1,000 points and borrowed somebody's Thunderhawk. So the Thunderhawk, I think, Forge World still makes that miniature. It's the gigantic dropship of the Space Marines, and back in the day it was about 1,000 points or so to bring into the battle. So this guy has 2,000 point army and this Thunderhawk flying along the board for like 2 turns, and at one point all of our anti-aircraft weapons just fire. I had all my rail guns, which are twin link back in the day, which twin link lets you re-roll attacks in the old school 40K, and we shot down this Thunderhawk in 1 turn. It crashed into the ground, did a whole bunch of wounds to all the guys inside. All those Terminators just blew their armor saves, and like 3/4 of this guy's army died in 1 round. You just gotta sit back and laugh at it now, but just the anger from that was just hilarious. And sometimes that's really kind of the attitude you gotta have when coming into the Apocalypse stuff. Is, you go in there, you need to have fun. Hopefully, no one's gonna be a jerk. Yeah, good luck with that one. There's another situation where we had a player who used to come to our local gaming club who hasn't been. He didn't play 40K for a long time. He quit the game before the rest of us did, and we think it was because of the experience he had in one of these Apocalypse games. He came that night, and he never came back after that. We think the game just broke him because his guys just got murdered. This was the first time he faced the Riptide, which it's a normal 40K unit, but it wasn't my Riptide. It was we had a woman there playing Tau. And she had several Riptides defending this fortress thing, and he didn't know they had AP2 pie plates. Pop, pop. There goes all his Terminators. He was Deathwing. So yeah, that was like the last time I think he ever played the game. Okay, where was I in painting this thing? So I think I'm actually pretty good with the backpack, the sword. I like how it all looks. This side's good. I got a little bit of shade in there, whatnot. Let's start assembling this guy. So those are, let's see, anything else about how to not play Warhammer 40,000 Apocalypse? I don't know. I think the goal is, if you want to have fun with it, be smart with who you play with. Don't be competitive. you can't take Warhammer 40,000 Apocalypse seriously. It is literally about stuff dying and stuff dying in droves, and and play fluffy. Because just because you can take an entire army of tanks doesn't mean you should be taking an entire army of tanks. That's not how the armies in Warhammer 40,000 fight, unless of course you agree to that, because it's Thanksgiving weekend here, or Thanksgiving week in the United States, and they might actually be running. The local GW store often runs Happy Tanksgiving, where it's an entire Apocalypse game, of just tanks. So you had to have things that had an armor value to them, and that's all it was for 4 hours. The tanks blowing each other up for 4 hours, which is absolutely silly and ridiculous. And there's another funny story from that I'll talk about in just a minute. So anyway, here's the backpack goes on like that. So I'm just going to apply a little bit of super glue to the little gray mount here, and a tiny bit along the bottom, or the top of the bottom half of the sword scabbard there. Let's just glue this guy in place and hold it there for a minute, and I will tell you a hilarious story about rules in Warhammer 40,000 Apocalypse. So, the table was a giant L shape. So I don't know, the whole thing might have been 16 feet long, something like that, maybe 20. It might have been closer to 18, because there's like 3 6x4 foot tables lined up in a giant L shape. And the table was so big that you effectively had sort of mini 40K games going on, because the turn order was kind of screwed up. One side would be doing the movement phase, the other side was shooting and things like that. So you're kind of left to just police the people around you to make sure they did the turn order right and follow the rules. Well, I was the one player who, because of how, I don't know, however it worked out, I think I only brought about 4 or 5 tanks. They only had 4 or 5 tanks, and that guy with 50 Imperial Guard tanks was there as well. I don't know, why do you have 50 Imperial Guard tanks? Seriously. I mean, GW thanks you, don't get me wrong. They're thrilled you bought 50 Imperial Guard tanks. I have no idea why you would. But, so because of the fact that I had like 3 or 4 Tau Empire tanks, I was deployed on both sides of the battlefield. So I had to run back and forth from the 2 edges of the table to resolve, my turn. And we got to a point where one side of the table had decided on an interpretation, I think, of the rules dealing with something to do with, what was it called? Type of artillery. Barrage artillery and vehicles was being played differently on one side of the table compared to the other. And it's like, oh, this is just a cluster. Okay, well, there we go. There's Cypher with the sword of somebody, probably the Lionel Johnson, that's what GW likes to hint at, on his back there. That's looking pretty good. We're starting to make some nice progress here in Cypher. I'm really liking how he looks. Let's go ahead and attach the side of his cloak here. So I got this all painted up. Let me see here. Actually, hold on. I'm going to hold off for a minute, because he has this little, like a knife right here along his belt. I want to paint that up first, because this arm is covering that up pretty good. So let's paint that up quickly, and that'll probably take me pretty close to the end of the live painting session here. And I think I can glue it on at the end, and that'll bring us really close to having this guy done. The guns are all that'll be left, and I'll do the guns on the next time. So working here with some Rhinox hide. I imagine this entire little knife sheath. Oh, he's also got a belt here I got to paint too. I'll do that. Yeah, I can do that. I don't know, we'll see. The belt's on the other side away from his arm that I'm going to glue on, but it wouldn't be a bad idea just to paint it up now. But this knife sheath is going to pretty much be either gold and or brown. So let's just go ahead and give it a base of the Rhinox hide. But all in all, 40K Apocalypse is coming back out. If you enjoy it, go for it. Just Just play it the right way, and you'll probably have fun doing it. Because you can do some really cool creative missions if you want to. You don't have to have all 10,000 points of the board at the start. You can do graduated, mission arrivals. So you can have people kind of fall back. You can do multi-stage missions. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do that you wouldn't do in a normal 40K game. But you really have to kind of want to what was I say? Brain fail again. You really got to set that thing up ahead of time and have everyone agree so they know what's going on. And it helps, once again, to work with people's armies, mainly because if you just create an objective and tell people what to do, someone's going to find a way to break it, because you probably didn't fully think things out as much as you should. Because let's face it, thinking things fully out when it comes to tabletop gaming is a very hard process. I design tabletop games. I do playtesting, and you don't realize how hard that is until you've tried to do it again and again and again, and just watched people just completely mangle what you thought was clear rules, or come up with some weird crap that's like, oh, I never intended that to happen. So you can do your best, but you're never going to make it perfect. So it doesn't hurt to talk with everybody and get an idea of what people are planning to do, and really find out if someone is trying to break the spirit of what you're going for. It's going to be much more fun for everyone involved if they play with some sort of artificial constraints, so that it's an enjoyable time, than if they try to just be a jerk and completely obliterate all the opponents. I also noticed there's some little details here I didn't paint on his chest too, so I gotta do that also. So let me put some Rhinox hide up there, because I'm gonna make those a very basic gold as well. Okay, apparently did not get any paint on my brush. Oh, this is always nerve-wracking, because there are these tiny little, I don't know what they are, they're like tiny little armor panels things, and just a slight slip up, well, that's a great way to get paint on your nice, neatly painted body armor. I think I might have just got a little bit there. Yeah, I screwed up a little bit. It doesn't really bother me, though. I don't, whatever. This guy's gonna go sit on my shelf, and that's gonna be it. Okay, so let's start adding some gold to the pieces I just painted with the Rhinox hide. Well, I have the Rhinox hide out. Let me paint the belt over here too. So let me just toss out one last thing in the whole topic of 40K Apocalypse. That has nothing to do with Warhammer 40K. I think I might have mentioned this show before, but talking about creating cool scenarios, there was one that I played with MechWarrior Age of Destruction. This was the old WizKids game. Well, it was their alternative rules, because, I didn't like the rules of the game. But it kind of gives you an idea of what you can do with larger scale games, with when people have lots of forces ready to go, and the kind of fun you can have. The basic gist of it was a mission to where one player initially was attacking a town. Their goal was to try to find the governor of the town and assassinate him, or capture him, or something like that. And then that happened. And when they finally captured him, the military reinforcements of the defender arrived. They kind of chased the person out of town, but they had the guy captured. And then they had to fight a falling back retreat kind of a thing to get across some bridges. So I think you can do a lot of fun, and you have these constantly changing scenarios where you wouldn't be able to do that in a normal 40K game easily, because you don't have enough players in there to make things interesting. You don't have enough units on the battlefield to make that kind of thing interesting. But with 40K Apocalypse, you could have guys be showing up as the game goes on. And you could be clever and do some really cool stuff and have a lot of fun spending all day playing Warhammer. or try to cram in a game of Apocalypse in 4 hours with a bunch of people you don't know under highly competitive circumstances and be absolutely miserable. But there we go. That's well, I can do a few more little details to that knife he's got right there. And then I want to go ahead and glue on the other side of his cloak, and we can call this rather important part of the build done. And I think then when I get to the next episode of painting Cypher, I think we're going to finish him up. Oh no, wait, actually maybe it might be 2 more. Because I still got the base to go. He's obviously glued on to a Pepsi bottle at the moment. But the base shouldn't take very long. Other than that, he's got the 2 guns, and that's all that's left to paint. Alright. Let me add a little bit of gold on these things up here. There we go, that's looking pretty good. Oh boy. Well, I'm hoping here, just to kind of get off the 40K topic for a few minutes as I finish up. I think I'm going to have I'm thinking, that's once again me talking out loud. No, but I've been planning to release some 3D printed terrain kits here. And I think I finally got everything all sorted out. I've got the second copy of the kit actually printing up as I'm recording this. I was having some trouble with one of the models. So I think I got that all sorted out. And very soon, going to be able to purchase some of these new my 3D printed terrain kits. They're actually Egyptian themed. It's called the Judgment of Osiris. I'm now going into like full-on self-promotion, shameless self-promotion mode. No, but it's the Judgment of Osiris, and it's an Egyptian-themed 3D printed terrain kit. So you'll probably see pictures of that coming out pretty shortly. And I think just initially I'm going to toss them up on Etsy and just sell them there, see what kind of traction I can get, and we go from there. But that's just a different project that I've been working on while I've been painting up Cypher here. I mentioned in terms of live streaming for the show coming New Year. I don't know what miniature I'm going to paint next. I haven't really decided yet. I was hoping the Tyranids would get something new, but so far the Tyranids haven't got anything new announced. So I don't know if I'd want to have anything for them to paint. Eldar, I don't know if they have anybody new either. I didn't see anything. But I'm not sure if all the details of the Eldar Craft World Codex has been released yet. That may still be something that's coming out here in the next week or 2. Alright. But I will definitely do another live painting series as I ramble on talking about who knows what I'm going to talk about. But other than that, I'm going to do more cosplay. As I mentioned, I'm planning to build a ghost costume from StarCraft. So that's going to be my big build project for next year, I think. And the Kaladesia short film is still slowly coming along. I have to start 3D printing. Before I do that, before I glue it on, let me make sure I want to fit it in the right place. I'm going to start 3D printing the helmet soon. So, I will show you that. I'll explain that in just a moment here. Alright, so let me go ahead and just put a little bit of glue along this ridge line right up there. And then we can go ahead, click that in place. I think that is correct. Something like that. I think that's correct. Oh wait. Getcha. Okay, here we go. Ugh. Well, that kind of blows. There's a little bit of a gap there. 1 second. Let me. It's like a quick emergency fix. Now normally you would, that's always a challenge, right? If I were to assemble this guy at the start, I could deal with that gap pretty easily. Some liquid green stuff or something would take care of it, no trouble. But now, because I want to do all the painting first, because it'd be easier that way, I've now got a gap in the miniature. I guess I could go in there, fill it in, and then repaint over it. It's not a very complex paint scheme on the cloak. It's a pretty basic dirty paint scheme anyway, so that would probably be easy to fill up or I could just ignore it. I'm probably going to just ignore it. But when I was talking about the helmet, the guy behind me here, this is the Aragul Hostile Atmosphere costume from that I used in Legends of Caladagia Heroes of the Aragul trailer. This helmet here is getting redone. It's got a nice 3D model of it, and I got to start 3D printing it up here pretty shortly. And then that's going to go along with the new body armor that he's wearing right now, and some other little gizmos, some new webbing and stuff that I've got. And then that's going to be all for a upcoming short film set in my original Caladagia universe. No film date set yet, but spring, maybe summer next year. I'm not entirely sure yet. I still haven't got all the CGI assets together. But there we go. I think we've got Cypher coming along really good. All that's pretty much left are his guns. So he's got his plasma pistol he's holding there. And here's his bolt pistol that he's got in a holster. And it's going to be supposed to be positioned in such a way that he is getting ready to kind of pull it out. So it gets glued like right there or something like that. I'll pull it like that so you can see it. Yay for dark colors showing up in lighting conditions. You think that help at all? No. Age is way too dark. I painted him a very dark green. That's a black primer. So I will go ahead and paint those guns up next time. Probably glue them on there, and then it's just going to be finishing up with the little modified base I built, which was just kind of like a metal plating railing kind of a setup. I turned it this way, you can see there's like a little bit of a railing he's standing behind. And that's just something I did to add a little bit of variety to his base. Nothing much there. But with all of that out of the way, I want to thank you guys for watching this episode of the Tabletop Battlefield Live. Once again, I'm Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield. If you missed any of the shows here live on twitch.tv, you can find the videos over at YouTube/user/Rocker Robotics. I post them there as well as some summary videos of some of the other stuff I did. I've got a whole summary video series on, let's get this guy over here, building the Tau Empire cosplay Fire Warrior helmet. So that was a lot of fun doing that earlier this year. Anyway, and if you want to find the audio files for these, you can actually subscribe to these in a podcast format where I'm just rambling on for an hour at a time. Because sure, why not? You can find those over at tabletopbattlefield.com/podcast. It's the old Army Showcase website I ran years ago when I launched the Tabletop Battlefield almost 11 freaking years ago. That's insane. This was, yeah, wow, yeah. More about that later. So, it's tabletopbattlefield.com/podcast. If you want to find the RSS feed for these things, you can drop into your podcast catcher. So, once again, thank you for watching, and have a good night.